Welcome. I'm Grace Pansze, and I researched honeybees and what causes the U.S. honeybee population to decrease. Humans need bees. Bees provide honey that humans use for nutritional and medicinal purposes. Bees produce beeswax that are used in cosmetic products. But most importantly, bees transfer pollen and seeds from plant to plant, pollinating them. A number of these plants we rely on for food, namely fruits and nuts. Without bees pollinating these plants would die off, effectively damaging our food supply and diets, as 30% of the food we eat is pollinated by bees. Each year, beekeepers lose 44% of their honeybee colonies. This number is far from sustainable for most beekeepers, as acceptable yearly losses range from 10 to 15%. If the world lost honeybees, it would also lose its food supply, and that would be a disaster. It's important to acknowledge that while it is true that the honeybee population experienced a 70-year downward trend, the bees were never close to extinction. They just suffered a decline in population. In 2008, the lowest point of the bee population, there were still 2.4 million hives in the United States operating. And after that, in 2009 and 2010, the biggest population growth resurgence occurred. Yes, the honeybee population is increasing little by little, but it's still not where it used to be. And beekeepers are still reporting significant annual losses. Beekeepers, however, are able to mend these losses with a method I like to call colony resurgence. Colony resurgence is a process where you take a healthy colony and then divide it, taking half the bees, and put them in a new hive, introduce a new queen, and thus you have a new colony created. This process is generally successful, but when beekeepers need to replace 44% of their colonies each year, the division weakens the apiary as a whole. Divided colonies are more susceptible to Varroa mites, disease, and lack colony health overall. Not to mention that a queen must be present for the colony to rebuild, operate, and become productive. And buying a new queen can cost upwards of $25, and beekeepers, on average, are buying 1,600 new queens every year. This is not sustainable. When the cost becomes too much and the bee losses become unmanageable, many beekeepers choose to pursue other professions. In fact, in the past 15 years, 75% of beekeepers have moved on. Since maintaining a healthy apiary is very expensive and many beekeepers have disappeared, the cost of renting bees for crop pollination has tripled. Thus, managing bees is more expensive, but also renting bees for the growers who require the pollination services is also more expensive. Yet the price of food has remained the same despite the production cost increase. Some argue that because the price of food is stable, that the bee deaths are insignificant. Bees, though, are not insignificant. Each year, bees contribute more than $15 billion toward agricultural pollination and production, and are responsible for pollinating around 75% of the most prominent crops in the United States. And they also create millions of gallons of honey each year. Without bees, farmers would have to pay for alternate pollination methods, which are not naturally occurring, that are more expensive, and would raise the food prices, impacting everyone. So, we know that the bees are dying, but how? Through my research, I found that it was not just one factor that was impacting the bees, but several factors working together. So, a primary cause of bee death is insufficient access to nutrition. Bees need food to sustain themselves. And when bees do not have this sustenance, they weaken. The lack of proper nutrients for bees to survive is caused by monocropping, the reduced amount of wildflowers and forage, and the lack of plant diversity near apiaries. Beekeepers remarked that colonies with access to good floral resources were generally healthier than those located where few floral resources exist and where bees were fed dietary supplements. Apiaries near meadows with an abundance of forage had less disease, mite prevalence, pesticide and toxin residues within their hive, and their bees had a longer lifespan. Malnutrition reduces individual bee longevity by approximately 4 days, which may seem short to us, but it's not so short to a bee that lives an average of 35 days. Luckily though, malnutrition is easily reversible. We just have to give the bees what they need. Nutrition. This can be done by farmers rotating crops instead of monocropping and reducing herbicide use to allow the nutritional forage to grow. The plight of the honeybee can also be accounted for in the mishandling of the bees by beekeepers. Beekeepers' primary goal is to maintain a healthy colony and keep the hive productive and producing honey. The role of the beekeeper also includes checking for mites, implementing colony defenses, keeping bees well nourished, and communicating with farmers to reduce pesticide use while bees are vulnerable. When beekeepers fail to fulfill their responsibility, bees ultimately suffer the consequences. Another contributor is the Varroa Destructor. Varroa is a highly destructive pest that can severely reduce honey production and colony productivity. The Varroa mite lives within the beehive and survives by sucking insects' blood. Varroa attacks adult bees and developing larvae, harming the colony for multiple generations. Bees that have been more severely infested by Varroa have deformed wings, bloated abdomens, discoloration of legs, and show marked reduction in body weight. The longevity of the infected bee is also reduced, and the infested bee becomes increasingly prone to viral and bacterial infections. When the hive becomes severely infested with Varroa mites, the colony eventually collapses because it can no longer sustain itself and operate productively. The widespread malnourishment of bees makes invading the colony even easier for Varroa. Moreover, more than 40% of beekeepers reported mites were harming their hives. And 10 years ago, beekeepers were reporting the same problem with the same numbers. This is hardly a new issue, and preventing Varroa infestations is difficult. However, regular monitoring of the mite population and consequently managing and treating them accordingly may reduce the adverse effects which the mite has on the colony. However, the most reliable chemical treatment for the Varroa mite has recently become ineffective, as the Varroa mite has developed a resistance. Chemical treatments are also seasonal, because when the honey flows, is at risk of contracting chemicals when they're placed within the hive. Another Varroa prevention method is installing mesh floors into the hive, causing Varroa to fall out, but this method is unproven. For now, at least, the bees will continue suffering from Varroa infestations. Neonicotinoids, a class of pesticides, are even more harmful to bees than Varroa. This is because the bees are exposed to the chemicals while foraging for food, while the mites must first invade the hive. Neonicotinoids were introduced in the 90s to reduce toxicity residues in crops for human consumption, but they just ended up harming the pollinators on which we rely for our food supply. Neonicotinoids' effects range from decreased genetic diversity and mating success of queens to long and short-term impacts on adult and larvae development and cognitive function. Neonicotinoids affect the bees central nervous system, causing interference with their flying and navigation abilities. Neonicotinoids also weaken the bee's immune system. Not only are neonicotinoids harmful to bees, the prevention of neonicotinoids is difficult as long as these chemicals are being used to treat plants. Bees are very easily exposed to large doses of chemicals on treated plants. These chemicals are treated on home gardens and are used on more than 140 agricultural crops. With the decrease in natural forage in cover plant, the bees have no choice but to feed and pollinate on the treated plants. The biggest problem with neonicotinoids is that they're not just killing the bees, they're seeping into the environment around them. Traces of neonicotinoids have been seen or have been found in rivers excuse me have been found in rivers, in the pollen of squash and other vegetables, and within numerous foods that have been treated by these chemicals. Since neonicotinoids cause the colony to become unproductive, the amount of honey produced is reduced the more the bees come exposed. Here is the honey, and here is the use of neonicotinoids. Colonies that have been exposed to neonicotinoids generally produce around 29% less honey than healthy colonies. And this is a problem because bees need honey for their winter stores in order for the colony to survive the cold season when food is unavailable to gather. When there's less honey for the colony, this can lead to malnutrition and the infestation of Varroa mites, which both cause complete colony collapse. When the colony collapses, beekeepers must research their colony, dividing and thus weakening their apiary. All of the primary causes of bee death are more manageable when beekeepers and bees are battling just one, but this combination of Varroa, neonicotinoids, malnutrition, and mismanaged bees is difficult to overcome. Steps can and are being taken to help honeybees regain footing to restore an economically sustainable population. On a national level, in 2014, former President Obama released a presidential memorandum that enforced creating a federal strategy to promote the health of honeybees and other pollinators. The actions stated in the memorandum included additional studies on pollinator health, migration, and the contributions of different stressors, identifying new and improving old beekeeping methods to limit exposure of neonicotinoids and other pesticides, educating the public, and increasing forage acreage. This memorandum is a great success for the honeybees, but these practices need to be maintained to have a real effect on the lives of honeybees. The easiest way for individuals to help bees is to reduce the use of pesticides and herbicides in gardens and lawns, to plant untreated seeds to lessen the risk of chemical exposure, to let lawns grow out and let clover grow in, and to buy locally and organically grown produce and honey products to support bees and local beekeepers. We must remember that bees provide food for us, and that without them, agriculture would become more expensive and food prices would increase. It's about time we pay back our working pollinators for our sake and theirs. Thank you.